A man named Thomas Hickson found her. He was traveling on foot from Leeds toward Armley early that morning. In his later testimony, he said he saw what he thought was a bundle of clothes lying at the side of the road. When he got closer, he realized it was a person. Hickson later testified that he could see immediately she was dead. He didn't move the body. Instead, he went directly to the nearest magistrate, a man named Robert Denison, reported what he'd found. This is where we see 18th century justice beginning to function. Denison acted quickly. By mid-morning, he dispatched the coroner, a man named John Wilson. Wilson arrived at the scene around 10 o'clock, accompanied by 2 parish officials and several men to serve as witnesses. Wilson's examination was thorough. He documented the location where the body was found. He noted the condition of the clothing torn severely, particularly on the back and sides. He examined the injuries, and he found something that immediately suggested this wasn't an accident. The rope marks on Anna's wrists were unmistakable. Deep grooves, skin abraded in a pattern consistent with sustained tension. Wilson noted in his report that the marks indicated she'd been bound tightly and had struggled against the restraints. What's remarkable about this case is how much physical evidence the investigators documented. They didn't have modern forensic techniques, obviously, but they understood how to read a body. Coroners in the 1750s were trained to look for specific sinswas. Death instantaneous or prolonged. Were there defensive wounds? What did the injuries tell you about how they were inflicted? In Anna Swarts' case, the evidence was clear. This wasn't an accident. This was sustained, deliberate violence. But documenting the evidence was only the first step. Wilson needed to determine who was responsible, and this is where witness testimony became crucial. Within 2 days, several people had come forward. A man named Joseph Bradley testified that he D.C. William Salisbury riding toward Armley on the evening of January 14th. Bradley said Salisbury was riding unusually fast, and he'd heard what sounded like something being dragged behind the horse. Another witness, Sarah Metcalf, was more direct. She testified that she'd heard screaming coming from the direction of the Salisbury property that evening. High-pitched, desperate. She'd assumed it was an animal in distress and hadn't investigated further. When she learned of Anna's death the next day, she realized what she'd actually heard. News traveled fast in a community the size of Leeds. By January 16th, everyone knew that Anna Dorothea Swarts was dead. Everyone knew how she died, and everyone knew that William Salisbury had been arrested. The reaction tells us something important about how this case was perceived. People were shocked, yes, but they weren't entirely surprised that a gentleman had killed a servant. What surprised them was that he was being held accountable for it. On January 20th, 6 days after Anna's death, Coroner Wilson convened a formal inquest. 12 local Menol property owners, as the law required, assembled to hear the evidence and deliver a verdict. They heard from Thomas Hickson, who'd found the body. They heard from Joseph Bradley and Sarah Metcalf about what they'd seen and heard. They examined the physical evidence of the rope marks, the injuries, the torn clothing, and they heard testimony about Anna's position in the Salisbury household, her character, her circumstances. The jury's deliberation didn't take long. By the end of the day, they'd reached their conclusion. Anna Dorothea Swarts had died of injuries sustained while being dragged behind a horse, and William Salisbury had caused her death. The verdict was willful murder. Salisbury was formally charged and committed for trial.